Our next set of notes is going to be some rebellions that occurred in North Carolina, as well as some different immigrant groups that settled in North Carolina, especially groups that settled in the backcountry area of North Carolina. So first, we're going to start with the graphic organizer that says that rebellious Carolina colony. And it's got who, what, when, where, why, and how for 3 different main events that occurred in the Carolinas during the colonial times. One is Culpeper's Rebellion, another is Carey's Rebellion, and the third is the Tuscarora War. So we're going to go through the information on the next slides, and we're going to pick out the who, what, when, where, why, and how for each one. Now, before we get to that, I want to either put some of this either on a sheet of notebook paper or in the margin somewhere, but some different information to know about early settlers to North Carolina. So I've talked a little bit about this already, but the first permanent European settlers to North Carolina were colonists from Virginia who were looking for land to cultivate or grow tobacco on. So that's how the first permanent European settlements got started in North Carolina. Those Virginians that came down to North Carolina were successful. They made a lot of money. And the King of England at the time, King Charles II, gave a charter to create the Carolina colony. Initially, it included what's today North and South Carolina, and it extended all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Now, on the West Coast. Now, out on the West Coast, Spain had also claimed control of those lands. So if they tried to enforce that charter all the way out to the West Coast, they probably would have had trouble. But they definitely had very solid control of what is today North and South Carolina. The king gives, and I say gives because really Native Americans were already living on that land, so it's hard to give that land away. But in his viewpoint and in these individuals' viewpoint, the king gives the Carolinas to 8 lords proprietors, who he owed favors to these 8 individuals. They were wealthy individuals, but they wanted land in North America. So he gave these 8 men, control of the Carolinas, and their job was to govern the Carolinas, and then the profits that came from the colony, they got to keep some of that profits from. They were to control and govern the colony. Early colonists who came to the Carolinas came mostly from England, and they settled mostly in the Tidewater region during the 1700s. Most of the colonies early on stayed very close to the ocean, within 100 miles or so of the ocean. It made trading back with England and other countries in Europe much easier, and the farther west you went, the stronger control that Native Americans had over the land. So there was less fighting over land, closer to the East Coast, closer to the ocean. After a series of rebellions, which is what we're going to learn about next, the lords proprietors lost control of the colony, and the king makes it a royal colony. He says, no longer are you guys in charge. You can't keep order. Things keep happening there. You're out. It's now a royal colony, so it's under control of the king, and I will send one governor whose job is to rule the whole colony for the king. Okay. One more slide before we get to Culpeper's Rebellion. You're going to need to know about the Navigation Acts. We took some notes on those with the 13 colonies notes or the American colonies notes. Here's a little more detail. The Navigation Acts were a series of laws that were passed in England in 1651, another law in 1660, and a final law in 1663, was designed to regulate or control trade in the colonies. England basically their whole point of having colonies was to make money. The Navigation Acts made it so that they had an easier way of enforcing taxes and tariffs on goods, so they made more money, hopefully, from the colonies. Colonial goods like tobacco, fish, flour, and shingles, which is what goes on a roof and out of the timber that was in the Americas, were taxed to raise money for England. The colonists were very upset about this because it was their profits that were taxed, so the colonists that were making and selling these things lost some of their profits. Okay, so that sets the stage for these next rebellions. So pause as you need to. You're going to have to kind of use this information to fill in your who, what, when, where, why, and how for each of the 3 rebellions, the 2 rebellions and the war. Use this information to help you. So the first one is Culpeper's Rebellion. Culpeper's Rebellion was a political struggle for control of the Albemarle Sound from 1675 to 1780. It occurred after those lords proprietors tried to enforce the Navigation Acts, and many colonists, rather than pay the taxes refuse, and that leads to a political fight. So there were three main players here in the Culpeper's Rebellion. Culpeper, who the rebellion's named after, is actually not one of the main players. He was more of a minor player, and we're not really going to discuss him much, but there was a man whose last name was Culpeper that was part of the rebellion, and that's where the name comes from. So a man named Thomas Miller and a man named Thomas Eastchurch were colonists who helped the proprietors. So the proprietors wanted to collect the taxes. Thomas Miller and Thomas Eastchurch stood to make money by helping enforce the taxes in the Navigation Acts. One was a tax collector, another was a merchant who was in close favor with the proprietors. So if they could make other colonists pay the tax, they stood to make more money. George Durant was a wealthy tobacco grower, and he argued that many of the growers were too poor to pay the taxes. He said if they paid the taxes, that would have taken away all their profit, and then they wouldn't have had any money left over to take care of their families. So the proprietors make Eastchurch the governor because he wants to help them and he wants to collect the taxes, and they make Miller the main tax collector. So the colonists naturally hate these guys because these guys are in charge of trying to take their money away from them. So fighting begins between the people who support Miller and Eastchurch. Some people stand to make money with higher taxes, and the supporters of Durant, who are generally colonists who don't make as much money, growers, smaller farmers who would be hurt more by the taxes. Enemies jail one another and testify before the proprietors about why their side is better. So it's almost like a small civil war in the colony over whether the Navigation Acts are a good thing or a bad thing. Leaders from both sides travel all the way to England to the king to give their sides of the story. In the end, the proprietors side with Durant because there were a lot of taxpayers who sided with Durant. A larger number of people sided with Durant. The proprietors feared they might lose their positions or be hurt or their families hurt if they don't side with the greater number of people. So in the end, the proprietors side with Durant and the masses, the large number of people. And so that's Culpeper's Rebellion. Make sure you have everything filled in for that. Pause if you need to, and then we're going to move on to Carey's Rebellion. Okay. Carey's Rebellion. In an attempt to have greater control of the colonists, the North Carolina General Assembly, which is like the legislature, the governing body of the government of North Carolina, say that all residents have to be part of the Church of England. So in the Carolinas, not every town always has a church. People kind of worship in homes or a little more freely. There's a lot of Quakers, who we'll learn more about later, who set up in North Carolina, and they don't think that you necessarily have to go to church, but you can study the Bible in your own home. And a lot of people don't know North Carolina kind of has a rebellious streak. Not everybody wants to just fall in line and do whatever the government says. So they hope that if they make everybody part of the Church of England, they'll all have to go to church and they'll listen to the church leaders and they'll kind of fall in line with what they want. Something called the Test Act is passed in 1704. It says that anyone who was going to be a government official had to swear to uphold the principles of the Anglican Church and no other. Basically, if you're going to be in the government, you've got to follow the Anglican Church, which is also the Church of England. You've got to follow what they say, do what they say. Basically, they're in charge and you listen to what they say. So there were a lot of people that followed the Quaker branch of Christianity. They either had to, and a lot of them were also in government, but they weren't always listening to exactly what the King of England or the Church of England said. They now either had to choose. They had to swear to a religion that wasn't theirs, or they had to not serve in their government. A man named Thomas Carey becomes governor in 1706, and at first he uses the Test Act to keep the Quakers from holding government office. So he basically says only people in the Church of England can be part of the government. People are upset. There's a lot of Quakers in the Carolinas. They get upset that the proprietors try to put a new governor in place because it's either their heads or the governor's head, so they try to kick Carey out of office. Kind of works for a little while. He's out, but then Carey again becomes governor in 1708 to 1711, and this time he says, okay, Quakers, you can have office. That's what the majority of the people want. We'll be safer, we'll have less violence in the colony, we'll have less fighting, both political and actual violence if we let Quakers be part of the government. So Carey gathers a group with weapons and they attack the Anglicans. They attack the people from the Church of England. But English soldiers who are stationed in Virginia come down to North Carolina. They're organized, better weapons, better trained. Carey and his followers run away and give up, basically. And this was at the time, this was in 1711, when the proprietors tried to force a man named Edward, try to force Carey to give up the governorship and install a man named Edward Hyde. So that's more detailed. Here in bold is a more summarized version. It's an uprising against the governor of North Carolina in 1711. So that can be your what. The rebellion was part of a long fight between the religious and political groups in North Carolina, with both fighting to be in power. It was a divide between the Quaker Party, or the Quaker Church, which Carey was a part of, and Anglicans belonging to the Church of England, which Governor Hyde belonged to. The next one is Tuscarora War. Again, we've got more detail here top. The more specific is here down in more of a summary is down in the bold in the bottom. The Tuscarora War. In 1711, the Tuscarora Indians attacked settlements in the Pamlico Sound. They were angry that the English were taking land and trying to stop Native Americans from hunting on the land that the English had stolen from the Native Americans and were farming on. So basically, it's a fight over land. Native Americans also felt they were treated poorly and tricked into treaties and were sometimes kidnapped and sold into slavery in the Caribbean islands. So the Native Americans are upset over poor treatment, deceptive treaties, and being sold into slavery. Fighting went on for 3 years until colonial forces came in, implemented harsh treaty terms, basically took over. They had better weapons, stronger forces, bigger numbers than the Tuscarora, and forced the Tuscarora to basically give up and accept very harsh treaty terms. Because of this, a lot of Tuscarora ended up moving to New York, where there were other groups of Tuscarora Native Americans already existed, rather than staying in the Carolinas. So it was from 1711 to 1714. It was a war between the British, Dutch, and German settlers and colonists in Virginia, South Carolina, and North Carolina versus the Tuscarora Native Americans that lived in the New Bern, Neuse River area in the Tidewater. So fight over who had the right to live, farm, and hunt on the land. So that's the front side. When you finish with that, we'll head and flip over to the back, and we're going to look at some different immigrant groups that settled in North Carolina during colonial times. Use this presentation and this graphical organizer or chart on the back to fill in the different information about immigrant groups who settled in North Carolina. In the slides, each slide is going to be one of the groups. So the first one will be the Scots-Irish. You'll be looking for where did they originally come from, what year or years did they settle in North Carolina, where in North Carolina did they settle, and why did they come to North Carolina. First group, the Scots-Irish. They were the first people to settle the backcountry, kind of from this part of the state westward, North Carolina, in the late 1600s. So for your first one, date settled, I'm going to put late 1600s. Where were they from? They were Protestants who moved from Northern Ireland. So Northern Ireland is going to be where from. They came to the Americas looking for religious freedom and land. So reason for immigrating, religious freedom and land. Okay. Before they came to North Carolina, they went to Pennsylvania, as Pennsylvania was known as a place for religious freedom. Pennsylvania was kind of crowded, so that's when they came to North Carolina looking for land. They moved to what is today the area around Charlotte and the area around Orange County. So Charlotte, a little bit farther south and west of here. Orange County, very, very close to here. Next group, the Germans. The Germans first came to Pennsylvania in the 1690s. They moved to the western edge of North Carolina in the 1730s to what is today eastern Rowan and Cabarrus counties. They were German settlers who came looking for new and inexpensive land. The Highland Scots. They came to the Sandhills region of the coastal plain. They came from Scotland. They started coming in the 1740s, and they came looking for cheap land. Next group is the Quakers. They came from England. First, they came to Pennsylvania in the 1600s, and then they came to North Carolina in the 1760s. So for the Quakers, you're going to put 1760s for when they came to North Carolina, for the date settled. They came to the Americas looking for religious freedom. Some moved with the German immigrants in North Carolina, and others moved southwest of Hillsborough, North Carolina. So for where area of North Carolina settled, we want to include the southwest of Hillsborough, North Carolina. And you can also go back and look where the Germans settled, and you can put those places as well. Last group is the Moravians. They were German-speaking immigrants that first arrived in North Carolina in 1752 from what was called Moravia. Today it's known as the Czech Republic in Eastern Europe. So where you've got where from, you can put a number of different things. You can put Moravia, you can put the Czech Republic, you can put Eastern Europe. Any of those or all of those would be acceptable. You can also put that they came from Pennsylvania, because before they moved to North Carolina, they lived in Pennsylvania first. Why did they immigrate? Just like a lot of the other groups, they came looking for religious freedom and more land. Moravians established their principal or their main town as Salem, North Carolina. So Salem, North Carolina will be your area settled. Hopefully you've got this whole chart completed now. You should have both sides, front and back. That is the last part of this. We should have one more activity before we start to review for our Unit 1B test, and that will be a flowcab on the 13 colonies.